Hello everyone, welcome to A Clear Perspective. I'm Serene. On August 15th, the Taliban entered the Afghan capital Kabul and declared that the war is over in Afghanistan. 20 years ago, Bush started a war against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan, but no one could ever imagine it would end this way. Why is the Afghan army so vulnerable? In addition, the Taliban have released around 5,000 prisoners from Kabul jail, including Islamic State and Al-Qaeda fighters, who could enter the United States through the southern border. The 20-year war against terrorism in Afghanistan cost over $2 trillion. More than 3,500 Allied soldiers sacrificed their lives. 2,000 were from the United States, and 20,000 U.S. soldiers were wounded. But in the blink of an eye, the Taliban took over the country completely. 20 years of U.S. efforts and sacrifices in Afghanistan ended up like this. The irony is that Twitter banned President Trump, but the Taliban spokesman can tweet freely. What an absurd world it is! In January 2020, President Trump ordered a precision strike and killed the top Iranian commander Soleimani. Iran is more powerful than the Taliban, but Iran could not dare to do anything during the Trump administration. But today, the United States can do nothing to the Taliban, watching them taking over Afghanistan. The question is, who is responsible for this? Will General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, step down for this? We will talk about it today. Although the Taliban is an organization people often hear about, not many people really understand the nature of it. Taliban is a Persian word that means students or seekers of knowledge. It is a Sunni Islamic fundamentalist armed group. Everyone should respect Orthodox religions, but the extreme practice of suicide bombers or cutting off heads and hands in the name of God is unacceptable to any civilized society. We all know that the former Soviet Union used to control Afghanistan. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Afghanistan fell into war and chaos. The Taliban was born at that time, with only 800 people at the beginning. At that time, the Taliban claimed its goal was to eliminate warlords and rebuild the country. It won the support of Afghan civilians because of their strict discipline and bravery, and their slogan of opposing corruption and restoring business. But many organizations that fought for power are liars. They went back on their word as soon as they gained power. With the support of the Afghan people, the Taliban quickly developed into a force of nearly 30,000 people with hundreds of combat vehicles and dozens of aircraft. Between 1996 and 2001, the Taliban established the national regime in Afghanistan, officially known as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. During this period, the Taliban repeatedly defied UN requests and provided refuge to bin Laden. In 2001, the world was shocked by the 9/11 attack. The US demanded that the Taliban regime extradite bin Laden, but the Taliban simply ignored it. In the same year, the United States led a group of NATO countries to launch a war against Afghanistan. This war lasted for 20 years. The Taliban's capture of the Afghan capital is reminiscent of the Chinese Communist Party's actions. In July this year, a Taliban spokesman said in a media interview that he welcomed the Chinese Communist Party's participation in the reconstruction process of Afghanistan. Then on July 28th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with the head of the Afghan Taliban Political Commission in Tianjin. Considering that the Taliban had not yet formally gained power, the Chinese foreign minister's public meeting with the Taliban left the world dumbfounded. That was when the US was preparing to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. So, obviously, the world's largest terrorist cult, the Chinese Communist Party, was endorsing its little brother, the Taliban. This is why the Taliban have been so reckless. A photo circulating on Twitter shows two Taliban leaders, one holding a book by Mao Zedong and the other by Xi Jinping. Both were studying it carefully. U.S. media reported that the Chinese Communist Party may be the first to recognize the new regime in Afghanistan after the Taliban seized the capital. Such a move would undoubtedly further weaken U.S. influence in Afghanistan. Soon afterwards, a spokesman for the Chinese government tweeted his support for the Taliban. He stated, "The situation in Afghanistan has undergone major changes. China respects the view and the choice of the Afghan people." The Chinese Communist Party, led by Xi Jinping, has once again sided with the terrorists. It was unexpected that the Afghan government forces were so vulnerable, and the world was shocked by the speed of their defeat. The U.S. has invested a lot in Afghanistan for 20 years. But why is this the result? The U.S. government has released a report pointing out a lot of corruption in the Afghan army, and the corruption caused the army to lose the will to fight. The latest news is that the U.S. has spent $83 billion to turn the Afghan army into a modern force, using the U.S. military as a reference. But in reality, the so-called modern force is heavily dependent on air support and a high-tech communication network, but reside in a country where only 30% of the population has a stable power supply. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGA, Mr. John Sopko, says they overestimated the Afghan army's capabilities. The latest report from Sopko, released last week, says the advanced weapons systems, vehicles, and logistics used by Western forces are beyond the capabilities of the mostly illiterate and poorly educated Afghan forces. For months, the Pentagon has been convinced that the combined Afghan military and the police should reach 300,000 people, far more than the Taliban, who are estimated to have 75,000 people only. But according to the U.S. Military Academy's Center to Combat Terrorism at West Point, they overestimated Afghan troops' strengths. Also, according to them, as of July 2020, the 300,000 included only 185,000 were in Army troops or Special Operations Forces under Defense Ministry, with police and other security personnel making up the rest. And only 60% of the Afghan Army troops were trained fighters. A more accurate estimate is that there are only about 96,000 combat-ready Afghan troops, excluding 8,000 Air Force personnel. The SIGA's report says that desertion is always a problem for the Afghan army. The report found that the Afghan army must replace 25% of its forces each year, and that desertion is the main reason. More importantly, for years, Afghan troops have been paid by the Pentagon. But from the moment the U.S. military announced its withdrawal plan in April, the responsibility for paying military salaries fell to the Kabul government. Many Afghan soldiers have complained on social media that they have not been paid for months. And there have even been cases where troops have never received food or supplies, not to mention weapons and ammunition. This is one of the reasons that Afghan soldiers were not fighting at all. How can they fight the enemy if they don't have food and supplies? The advanced weapons provided by the U.S. Army are basically the same as scrap metal without the infrastructure that goes with them. What is the use of such an army, even if it is large in number? Advanced weapons need people to operate. The rapid withdrawal of U.S. troops was the last straw. We can't help but ask, for so many years, how did the US military train the Afghan army? The deployment of US troops is also a military operation, so General Milley may be held accountable. Although the order to withdraw is from Biden, it was the military that implemented it. And the Biden administration will certainly find someone to take the blame. Let's wait and see if Milley resigns. We can see that the Chinese Communist regime backed the Taliban. Therefore, it is more important to get rid of the CCP. If the US and the allied forces can learn a positive lesson from Afghanistan, they may be able to avoid making even bigger mistakes. From a geopolitical point of view, the more important thing for the US and the allied forces now is to protect Taiwan. In other news, Soros wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal criticizing Xi's leadership. This is quite shocking, as previously the financial elite of Wall Street were praising the CCP. Many people think Soros is a part of the deep state, and therefore his change in attitude towards the CCP may also represent the views of the deep state. So does this mean that the deep state has broken ties with Xi Jinping? Xi has offended both the deep state and the various interest groups within the CCP by purging the party of his rivals. So why is the deep state so upset with Xi? Let's see what Soros has to say. Soros criticized Xi Jinping's totalitarian rule in China, saying that Xi Jinping is currently the most dangerous enemy against free societies. What exactly happened? You know, Soros was actually praising the Chinese Communist Party in 2010, claiming that, quote, China has not only a more vigorous economy, but actually a better functioning government than the United States. It seems that the events of the last decade have flipped his views. Soros finds it particularly troubling that so many Chinese seem to think the social credit system is not only tolerable, but actually enticing. He says that Xi is waging a systematic campaign to remove or counteract people who have accumulated a lot of wealth. This campaign is threatening to destroy the source of wealth. Xi is determined to bring the wealthy under the control of his one-party state. It is the wealthy, as Soros wrote, that supports the Communist Party. He writes that the source of wealth have been destroyed along with the interests of the deep state. One thing to make clear here, Soros is not supporting the Chinese people in the article. He is being a realist and a pragmatist. What he supports is the continued suppression of the Chinese people by the CCP to benefit the deep state. And Xi Jinping is a dictator who has seriously interfered with their interests, especially of taking away Hong Kong's autonomy status. Hong Kong originally held many assets of the deep state, but Xi recklessly destroyed them. Taiwan has replaced Hong Kong in this regard with many of the deep state's assets there. But now, Xi is going to ruin those as well. Seeing that the US is helpless in preventing the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, the CCP may take that as a sign to make its move against Taiwan. It seems that the way Xi Jinping has been handling China's domestic affairs has caused considerable damage to the interests of groups in China and abroad. This may be the real reason behind Soros' article. If things continue on like this, I'm not sure the deep state will be so polite with Xi Jinping. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time.